From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
A blockbuster jobs report blows past all expectations with more than 300,000 jobs added in March. We'll have reaction from the White House with Bernstein of the Council of Economic Advisors.
President Biden visits the collapsed Key Bridge in Baltimore today as his administration asks Congress to authorize a still unknown amount of money for its reconstruction.
And the Israeli army dismisses 2 officers after 7 humanitarian aid workers were killed in a strike this week. We speak to Cindy McCain, executive director of the World Food Program, about the complicated and dangerous effort to feed the hungry in Gaza. So we have much to discuss this evening. We begin, though, with President Biden speaking earlier at the site of the Baltimore Bridge collapse.
We will support Maryland and Baltimore every step of the way to help you rebuild and maintain all the business and commerce that's here now. I fully intend, as the governor knows, to have the federal government cover the cost of building this entire bridge, all of it. When I stand here, I call on Congress to authorize this effort as soon as possible.
And of course, the White House has already made that request formally. The OMB director, Shalonda Young, asked Congress to authorize the bridge reconstruction in writing. And in the letter, it says, quote, while we continue to assess reconstruction costs alongside our federal and state partners, we are asking the Congress to join us in demonstrating our commitment to aid in the recovery efforts by authorizing a 100% federal cost share for rebuilding the bridge.
It may not come as a surprise. The House Freedom Caucus already out with its own statement on this, writing, quote, before Congress considers any emergency supplemental funding for the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, it's important that, 1, we first seek maximum liability from the foreign shipping companies up front, and 2, the Port of Baltimore draws upon already available federal funds, unquote. We've set up the debate. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Megan Scully, who's eagerly anticipating the return of lawmakers next week. I hope you get rest this weekend, because this is going to be a fight. The president says we don't wait for the blame game or for the insurance companies to weigh in here. Pay for it now. Go back and do the rest later. Is that going to fly in the House?
We'll see. The House Freedom Caucus is really putting the line there. And already Speaker Johnson is having to fight them on other fronts, including Ukraine aid. So, and they're also trying to rope into this the liquefied natural gas ban that the administration put into place. And they want to overturn that as in exchange for freeing money for Baltimore. So It's all very complicated. Most likely, this funding for Baltimore will go through. It's supposed to be somewhere north of about $1 billion and won't be needed all at one time, which is why you don't see this traditional request saying we need X amount of money. They're still assessing the situation, but they do need money to at least begin or to pay for the beginnings of the recovery and then the rebuilding. So we'll see what happens in the next week or so.
Yeah, pretty remarkable to make a blank check request when you have also asked for explicit dollar figures in requests in terms of funding for some of what you've mentioned, allies including Ukraine. When they return, given everything we've heard from Speaker Mike Johnson over the last week, indicating we could see this on the floor, maybe in the form of a loan or using foreign Russian assets that have been seized to pay for Ukraine's war effort. How hard is it going to be to actually happen after all that talk when he's back in the chamber and has to look Marjorie Taylor Greene in the eye?
I think we're all going to be looking directly at that interchange when the House returns next week. It is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. But the Speaker continues to stand by his comments that he plans to bring Ukraine to the floor. Now, we don't expect that vote to happen next week. We're told it could be several weeks before they actually get a vote, something to vote on the floor. In the meantime, they're trying to haggle over what they can put into it to sweeten the pot for Republicans who would vote against it, and also for Johnson to save his own hide in terms as Marjorie Taylor Greene goes after his job.
If this is tied with Israeli funding, there's a question about whether outrage from progressive Democrats over Joe Biden's policies in Israel's actions in Gaza might end up sinking Ukraine funding. How much of a concern is that for this White House?
It is an extremely tricky political calculation. For the first time this week, we saw some of President Biden's staunchest allies on the Hill, including Senator Coons from his home state, come out in support of putting restrictions on this aid to Israel if they go into Rafah, if they do not take proper safeguards against killing civilians. So it is an incredibly difficult political needle. It's something that is dividing the Democratic Party, and Biden is going to need full Democratic support to get this through. You have all of these different factors coming down to this one vote on this aid package, and it's going to be a fragile coalition that finally pushes it over the finish line.
And of course, that's not even to mention they need to reauthorize FISA within the next several weeks.
Which could come first.
And the order of operations here is very much in question. Megan, buckle up. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks for you and the rest of the Congress team. Megan Scully, of course, leads our congressional coverage here at Bloomberg. Elsewhere, we got a blowout jobs report this morning. Payrolls rising in March by the most in nearly a year, topping even the highest analyst estimates at over 300,000. We got reaction from economists, investors, and policymakers today on Bloomberg.
This was a hot report. The jobs report that confirmed U.S. economic exceptionalism.
Another incredible jobs report, right? 303,000 jobs.
300,000 jobs that were created in the United States this month. It's on top of historic gains in the labor market.
I think the Fed would still like to get 2 to 3 cuts in this year. You need to see the data improve.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Enda Curran. So, Enda, of course, more people getting jobs is a good thing. But there are some cases in which good things could also be bad things if it means that this is an economy and a labor market still running so hot that the fight against inflation cannot yet be won. How should we be thinking about this in terms of the implications for what the Federal Reserve is likely to do?
Well, the good news first, broad-based gains, healthcare, construction, government, leisure and hospitality adding enough jobs. It's back to its pre-pandemic levels now. More people also joining the workforce, so the participation rate going up. And by the way, there were upward revisions to data sets from the previous few months. So these are very good employment numbers for any economy. That's the good story. But then to your point, the double-edged sword is that obviously it suggests there's plenty of work out there that will keep some pressure on wages. And if keeping pressure on wages, well, then that doesn't exactly lean itself towards the Fed bringing down interest rates in a hurry. So I think the negative takeaway from today, if you're in that camp, is there's no case for a near-term rate cut. And you see traders already adjusting their bets on that.
We're not hearing from Democrats like Elizabeth Warren quite as loudly about the Fed damaging the job market with higher for longer. And is there still a risk that this series of rate increases could actually end up damaging what's an historically strong job market?
All of the danger, because the jobs market is a lagging indicator. Yeah. So at some point this could catch up on us. That's the concern. Part of the story is immigration. That's really been boosting the jobs force. Mm-hmm. There was a warning signal in today's data, actually, about, to your point, Joe, and that comes to black unemployment. That increased to 6.4% from 5.6%. Within that, the biggest hit was to black women. But the point is, some analysts make the point that black people are the last to be hired in an upswing and the first to be fired in a downturn. So some are warning this could be an early warning signal. We're not there yet. It's only one data print. Yeah. It'll take a few more months to figure this out, but that just goes to your point as one warning signal.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Enda, because we actually asked the Deputy Treasury Secretary, Wally Adeyemo, about that black unemployment rate earlier today. This is what he told our Anne-Marie Horder.
So it's important to remember that where we started. And when we came into office at the beginning of the Biden administration, black unemployment was above 16%. It's come down to historic lows, and I was in the Obama administration, and it took us years to see unemployment come down during the great financial crisis, and we've seen far faster movement there. So
an interesting point there from the Deputy Secretary. We also had joining us at Bloomberg earlier today the acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, and was asked specifically about the role that immigration may factor in here, knowing we are all having an active debate about immigration, more specifically perhaps illegal migration over the southern border. But that could be what we're seeing in terms of the labor force participation and just helping catalyze the job growth we have seen.
Yeah, it has become a huge talking point in recent months, ever since the CBO put out a report putting numbers on the contribution from immigration to population growth. The thinking is that we're talking here about at least documented migrants are taking pressure off the inflation side of things, and they are filling roles that would go unfilled. Now, of course, there's a separate political debate about what's going on at the southern border, but right now economists are saying this immigration story has probably been under-considered when it comes to the US economic debate, and a lot of people are now focusing on just what contribution all of these new arrivals are making to the workforce.
And thanks for being with us, as always, as we turn our attention to the White House. Kayleigh, next. This is an interesting moment for a White House that's promoting a strong job market, but also looking at the months ahead and the trajectory of interest rates and inflation.
Absolutely. And that is something that the former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers commented on when we got this March jobs report. Let's take a listen to what he said.
This was a hot report that suggested that, if anything, the economy is re-accelerating. This is very different from what most people, I think, were expecting.
We're joined now by Jared Bernstein, the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Chair Bernstein, always great to see you here on Bloomberg TV and radio, especially on Jobs Day. And I'm sure you and the White House are thrilled with over 300,000 jobs that were added in the month of March. But sometimes, as we were just discussing here on set, good things can come with potentially some not so good consequences. How concerned should we be that we will get a re-acceleration in inflation as a result of the re-acceleration we're seeing in the labor market?
Well, I'm definitely going to speak to that and respond to Larry's interesting comments as well. Larry is one of my good friends, and I always learn when we talk. But let me start by saying that I don't think you're ever going to see President Joe Biden step up to a microphone and say, darn it, we got too many jobs last month. This is a great jobs report. It's really important for Americans across the land, from all walks of our labor market to have the kind of opportunities, persistent opportunities, that this labor market is providing, with an unemployment rate below 4% for 26 months running. As we've documented extensively at the Council of Economic Advisors, persistently being at or near full employment is one of the best ways to make sure people get a fair slice of the growing pie that they're helping to bake. And one of the places you see that in today's report is on the wage story. And that's where I'd like to go in response to your question, to what Larry said. Wages are beating prices. Now, they beat prices for 10 months in a row. That's great to see on a year-over-year basis. We don't know March inflation yet, but the wage growth, 4.1%, very likely to have beaten price growth, of course, in March. So that'll make it 11 months. But those wages have been decelerating. They've been growing more slowly. So I mildly disagree with Larry when he says the economy is re-accelerating. When you actually look at the wage story, which is really the price component in here, it is not re-accelerating. So I think we have to get under the hood there a bit.
Well, that's very important here, Jared. If that's the case, you've been spending the last many months talking about sustainable, steady growth as opposed to something overheating that would require higher interest rates. Is this the definition of that, when we're blowing the doors out with 100,000 payrolls more than expected?
I think so. I mean, I think, I noticed the headline, and I haven't read it yet, but David Mericle is really a very sharp macroeconomist at Goldman Sachs in the research group, and he put out a report today that was titled something like "How You Can Have Strong Growth and Slower Inflation." And so a lot of that, of course, has to do with the improvements on the economy's supply side. Now, again, work that we've done at CEA finds that about 80% of the disinflation we've experienced and enjoyed so far, the fact that inflation is down 2/3 off of its peak, looks to us to come from largely from the economy supply side, to some extent from cooling demand as well. So one of the questions we're really circling around here is there more room to run in terms of disinflation on the economy supply side? One area where you see that happening, you just talked about it with your prior guest, is on labor supply, but also probably in the goods sector. I think that's probably the argument that Mericle is making in that piece when I get to read it this weekend.
Well, Jared, Chairman Powell actually made a similar argument when he spoke earlier this week. He talked about how the fact that growth has been so resilient may have a lot to do with the supply side. And I know that you do not comment on Fed policy. I'm not going to ask you if the Fed should cut rates or when they will. But as we consider what you're talking about here, steady growth, is it possible that the level of interest rates that this economy needs or will tolerate to maintain stasis, to be steady, is higher than it was before the pandemic when all of these supply shocks first hit?
Well, of course it's possible. And again, if you listen to some sage words from Larry, he talks about that all the time, saying the neutral rate of interest must be higher than folks think it is for the very reason you just took us through. However, there are what I would think of as post-pandemic economics that are still in play here. And so I think those who tell me that the long-run neutral interest rate hasn't gone up much, and I think the Fed would be in that category, they may have a point as well. I think you have to distinguish between near and longer term. Right now, though, I think it's really key to understand this picture, to not just look at the economy's demand side and not even look at just the jobs in today's report. Look at the wages as well. They're doing something very important from the perspective of the kitchen table. President Biden knows how important breathing room is for families, and they need real wage gains, and that's what they have been getting, and that's really important. We've got a lot more work to do to help cut costs. But that's right there in the data. At the same time, we've seen some slowing, some deceleration in nominal wage growth, whether it's in the report today or in the ECI, which is looked at more carefully. So again, I think those are all combinations of a steady, stable path forward.
Well, as long as we're not commenting on the Fed here, Jared, I do want to ask you about something we were just discussing before you joined us, and that's the unemployment rate for Black Americans, up to 6.4%, which is the high that we saw last August of 2022, as a matter of fact. And I talked to Lindsay Owens about this today, an economist at the Groundwork Collaborative, about the rise in Black unemployment. Here's what she said, and we'd love to have you respond. Let's listen.
What we should see in a full employment economy and a labor market this strong is actually a real strengthening of the labor market for Black workers, for women. When the labor market tightens up, that's usually when workers who employers might discriminate against in sort of looser labor market conditions bring folks off the sidelines. And so it is a little surprising to me to see that number tick up.
Jared, what's your thought? What's the thought of the White House on this? Is it a leading indicator? How do you feel?
I very much agree with the things Lindsay just said, and I think they're not just on point, but they have a very strong empirical basis. I think what's important is that we're achieving precisely the kinds of outcomes she was talking about just a few months ago. For the year of 2023, and that's important, I'm taking a yearly average, I'll get back to that in a second, the Black unemployment rate was the lowest on record, going back to when that series starts in the early 1970s. The Black-white gap, totally consistent with Lindsay's rap you just heard, lowest on record, Black-white unemployment gap. And so this very much was associated with persistent full employment. Now, the reason I took a yearly average there is because these numbers are very noisy month to month. I think Wally was right earlier in the clip that you played to emphasize the trend. Now, of course, we're going to watch something like the pop we saw there in March. We're going to watch that very carefully. But 1 point doesn't make a new trend in the data, especially when the more lasting trend is going in the other direction.
And Jared, finally, and it's so great of you to give us so much of your time from the North Lawn of the White House today. Of course, President Biden himself is not at the White House right now because earlier today he boarded Marine One and he went to Baltimore to see the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge. From an economic standpoint, how are you thinking about the ramifications of that event? Obviously, first and foremost, a human tragedy, but we are now talking about 100,000 jobs tied to the port that could be affected. Then there's going to be a reconstruction effort down the line, which could actually be somewhat of a growth catalyst. How do the economics balance out in your mind?
Well, first of all, I very much appreciate your starting from the perspective of human tragedy. Of course, we're going to talk about the economic impacts, but that is absolutely the right place to start. Those workers filling potholes on the bridge in the dark of night, really a very deep tragedy there. Turning to the economics, I think it's been very impressive to see the extent to which the Unified Command, leaders from the Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers are already up and running. My understanding is that there's already a one-way pathway, a path there out of the harbor, or at least soon to be. And I think we've heard the prediction that they may be able to get this running by the end of May in terms of fully restoring the pathway out of Port Baltimore. At the same time, there's 15,000 direct jobs. You cited the indirect number. And so we've been working hard with folks on the ground to try to find ways to retain employment there. We scanned very carefully the UI claims data from Thursday to see if there was anything there yet we could see. We didn't really see much yet, but we'll continue to watch that. Very happy to see the repair process underway, though.
With us on a jobs day, Jared Bernstein. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you. Come back and see us soon here on Bloomberg. Coming up, an exclusive interview with Argentine President Javier Milei. Highlights from that conversation next, only here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. Argentina's President Javier Milei facing an uphill battle to stabilize the economy in his country, suffering triple-digit inflation and its sixth recession in 10 years. In a wide-ranging interview with Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite, he discussed his ambitious reform plans, talked about inflation, populism, and more. Let's listen.
But still, and despite the put options and the interest-bearing liabilities, what we inherited from the previous government, and after having bought almost $12 billion, what we have sterilized through the purchase of the BOPREAL, and as regards the fiscal surplus, the money base hasn't changed. So we are cleaning up the balance sheets of the central bank, and in so doing, the long-term price level shrinks because we are shrinking the nominal scale in the economy, and the slope is reduced and the inflation rate comes down. This is why it is so important to clean up the balance sheets of the central bank to get rid of that pressure. Once we achieve that and are able to undertake the financial reform in order for there no longer to be the possibility of issuing rediscounting, the financial reform actually has to move towards a free banking system integrated with the capital markets so that there are no runs and all the imbalances are cleaned up through prices. In that context, if you also have your public accounts, government accounts in order, and you don't use the central bank to finance deficit, and if you also lift the currency restrictions, well, the first thing you need to do is clean up the central bank balance sheets. Once we've done that, there's the anti-issuing law, one very key attribute of which is that this will make it a crime against humanity and not time-barred if you issue money. It may well be the case that once we leave office, someone may come along and want to change that. They may do that, but then someone else might come back and lock them up in prison for doing that.
These might all be very admirable reforms, but at the moment, if you are an Argentine living here at the moment, there is short-term pain in the same way as there was with Margaret Thatcher, with all the people who you admire. And I've just looked at the statistics. They're quite frightening. The average salary in Argentina is at its lowest level since 2003. 57% of Argentines live in poverty. Consumer spending dropped 23% in February. So far, the interesting thing is your support has stayed high at 50%. But do you accept that there is a time limit on how much pain Argentines can take to take these reforms?
The first thing is, the way we see it, there has been a cultural change in Argentina. And most Argentines have understood that the solution is not populism. Today, wages are miserable, not through our own fault. That is due to 20 years of populism. When you take the average wage of Argentines back in the 1990s and update it to today's currency, that would be $3,000.
That was the president of Argentina, Javier Milei. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. Israel has released its report on the death of 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers killed earlier this week by airstrikes. According to the IDF, 2 members of the Israeli military have been fired as a result. We spoke earlier today exclusively with Cindy McCain, executive director of the World Food Program. We began by asking whether that incident is giving her organization reason to rethink its efforts.
WFP has no intention of pausing right now at all. We are there, we're staying in, and we need, obviously, as you know, as what occurred today, we hopefully will have the ability to get more trucks in and more aid in as a result of the changes that are being made. We'll see.
The headlines this week have been sobering, Director, as you well know. Not only World Central Kitchen, the UN says 165 relief workers have been killed in this conflict, making it the deadliest ever for relief workers. You've described the impossible task, in your words, of getting trucks, particularly to the north, to those who need food in Gaza. I'm wondering what you hear from Israel when they turn your trucks around, what the communication is like, and how do they justify not letting you in?
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to World Central Kitchen. I know exactly how that feels because I've lost people on my watch too. And so I pray for them every day, and I pray for Jose's strength in all of this. It's been a frustrating go for us because it's been start and stop and start and stop. We've had sometimes we can get a few trucks in, sometimes we can't. Sometimes we're given permission and then not let go. There's no organization or coordination to it, and it's still too little. What we need, and hopefully this will give it to us, is more access. Right now, there's 1.1 million people who are starving to death. Famine is imminent. So it is imperative that we get as many trucks as possible north, especially, to be able to stave off this famine. And we've got to do it now. We can't wait. The waiting has got to be done. We've got to get this going. It's too desperate not to.
Well, we have seen Israel make some changes, as you've alluded to, just in the last 24 hours. The Erez border crossing has now been opened. How immediate will the impact of that opening be? How much further will that go to getting you to scale in terms of the distribution you are attempting to achieve?
Well, I'm hopeful it will help for this reason, because there's a great deal of prioritization that takes place, and a lot of the Israelis X-ray everything, and they make sure that their trucks only are carrying food on board, which I understand. But we have to be able to do that in a much more efficient fashion and in a faster fashion. Things are held up. The gates have to be left open longer. They can't leave them open from 8 to 6 or 8 to 5, whatever it is, and then randomly close them when they feel like it. It's too important. And more importantly, having more access internally. We have been using the fence road, is what we call it, along the eastern border of Gaza. And as you know, there's a middle road and a beach road as well. All of these routes need to be safe. They need to be unfettered, and we need to be able to travel on them in a safe and in a safe fashion, but also remembering our humanitarian principles along the way, and deliver food in a principled fashion.
Can we put a finer point on this, Director McCain? If you're getting 1/100th of the food in that's needed, I believe that's what your most recent measurement was. Is it Israel or Hamas that's blocking your trucks?
Well, Israel is in charge, so it's Israel that's blocking the trucks, or has been blocking the trucks. So, I mean, with that, it's their checkpoints where we get turned around.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there have been some instances where the trucks were looted, where we got stuck in a crowd, where things were not vetted properly for us. And tragedies occurred as a result of that. And we don't want any more of that. Our whole goal is to get food in and feed people as fast as we possibly can.
Well, as you say, Director, that you're being stopped at checkpoints, so it's what I would believe would be IDF personnel that are actually manning those checkpoints. Do you see a breakdown and inconsistency with the communication you're getting at the higher levels of the Israeli government as to what you should be able to do versus what's actually happening on the ground? Who is it directly that you communicate with, and are they saying the same things at all ends?
Well, we obviously have our contacts within COGAT and within the IDF, as well as the political side of it. All of those bodies play a part of this. In many ways, they've been helpful. In a lot of ways, they haven't been. So what we are asking for is consistency and the unfettered access, as I said, and the ability to move in through more. Not just more gates, but ports also. As I mentioned earlier, the port of Ashdod is extremely important to being able to deliver food to the north.
There are many other areas around the world I know the program is working in that we want to ask you about, Director McCain. But in terms of Gaza, finally, knowing that the World Food Kitchen has stopped its deliveries and NARA, another group, has as well, can the World Food Program fill the gap left by those departures?
Listen, it's not about filling the gap. We need everybody in there. But yes, if you're asking we can get to scale, yes, we can. Right now, we have food amassed outside the gates and on the border, enough to feed 1.1 million people for 3 months. We need to get in. So it's not about anybody taking anybody's spot or anything like that. We all work together in a good way. But we need to get in. We need to get in now.
Well, as Joe suggested, Director, unfortunately, millions of people on the brink of famine are not just contained to Gaza. There are other areas of the world that are getting far less attention right now, including Haiti, which, of course, has a long history of food insecurity. But because of the recent uptick in gang violence we have seen, we know that there potentially are millions of people who at least need food assistance, if not are on the brink of famine themselves. What should we know about conditions in Haiti? How hard is it for the World Food Program to be doing its work there right now?
We are in Haiti, and we have not stopped delivery at all there. It is, as you just described, it's a very compelling place to be because it's dangerous. The country is pretty much run by the gangs now. The places that we operate there are more on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince and further outside the country, not outside the country, but outside that particular metropolitan area. So we've been able to continue our school feeding programs and our smaller smaller places where we can provide hot meals, et cetera. But it's difficult. I mean, we have they're evacuating all the embassies, they're evacuating unnecessary personnel there, and I understand the need to do that. But we're not leaving. We intend to stay.
Well, with that said, Gaza and Haiti are taking a lot of attention and certainly generating a lot of headlines right now, Director. As you work into your second year at the helm of the program, what other parts of the world could be left behind? Is it Sudan? Is it Chad? Where should our focus be?
You just named it: Sudan, Chad, the Sahel of Africa, DRC Congo. All of these places are in desperate straits right now and need our support and the support of the world, more importantly, within all of these areas. I might also say, and I failed to mention this just earlier when we were talking about Gaza, I want to thank President Biden for his efforts on this. It was really President Biden that shook this loose. The changes. And so I'm very grateful as a humanitarian and someone who operates the largest humanitarian organization. I'm very grateful for his participation and his willingness to represent the humanitarian community.
That was Cindy McCain, Executive Director of the United Nations World Food Program, speaking with us earlier today. Now, coming up, we'll set our eyes on what's coming this weekend as supporters can snap a photo with former President Donald Trump for $25,000 at his fundraiser. Prices go all the way up to beyond $800,000. We'll have more with our political panel next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm here to say your nation has your back, and I mean it. I was just briefed by the Unified Command about the ongoing impact of this tragic collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge last Tuesday. The damage is devastating, and our hearts are still breaking.
That was President Biden earlier today at the site of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew in Washington, and we turn now to our political panel, who is elsewhere in the U.S. right now. Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, and Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, who is in Arizona and, of all places, inside, as we speak, State Farm Stadium, though we should disclose Rick is not going to be in attendance at the Final Four games this weekend for the NCAA tournament, much to his chagrin, I'm sure. But very great to have both of you joining us from wherever you may be at this point. Jeannie, just to begin with what we heard from President Biden today, reinforcing that he would like the federal government to be footing the bill for the bridge in Baltimore. There's an entire question around whether or not congressional approval would be coming easily for him. But did he do the very basics of what he needed to do on the ground today?
Yeah, for a minute, Kaylee, I thought you were going to say that Rick is playing this weekend. So I'm glad to hear he's not. I do think that the president did what he needed to do. We know that he had said right after the bridge collapsed that he was going to go when he was able. It is the job of the president or any leader. He was going to survey the site and, most importantly, talk to the families of the victims and pledge the support of the federal government to rebuild. And of course, we heard from the OMB director, or Congress did this morning via a letter, where she asked them to sign on to approving, when the time comes, the authorization of a rebuild of that bridge. And so the president is, doing the work he needs to do. When Congress gets back next week, the question's going to be, how much do they need to rebuild? That number is still not known. And is Congress going to authorize that amount in full?
Would it help, Rick, to provide a number, maybe something as much as, maybe talk about the fact that this could well cost in excess of $2 billion. Some estimates are closer to $4 billion. To go to this House right now for a blank check, Rick, will result in what?
Yeah, I think a blank check is just bad politics, right? At a time when everybody's concerned about government spending, especially their impact on inflation. I mean, it's been well drawn out. And just all the other priorities that the president has in addition to this. And this is an important national priority for all the reasons you talked about earlier in the segment. The bottom line is this is a disaster declaration. You would typically put a number on that disaster declaration. If you need more, you can come back. And I think that's what Congress is going to say. We're going to put a number on it if you can't. We'll give you the money to get started on this. And when you need more, please feel free to come back and we'll get it for you then. But otherwise, the idea of a blank check coming out of Congress right now, I think, is just too much to ask for.
All right, so there's one number that we don't know this evening. But, Rick, there is another number that we do know, or at least have a sense of, and that is how much former President Trump and his re-election campaign might be able to raise this weekend at a big fundraiser at John Paulson's house in Palm Beach. They're expected to bring in $43 million. Admission is running as high as over $814,000. The Biden campaign was big time playing up that fundraiser in New York just last week. $25 million raised alongside former Presidents Clinton and Obama. $43 million is a significantly larger haul, Rick. Is Donald Trump about to turn his fundraising race around?
Well, he needs to turn his fundraising race around. He's been lagging all during this election cycle. And the reality is the Biden campaign has done a good job of not only raising more money, but talking about raising more money. Donald Trump used to love to brag about the fact that he didn't have these big dollar donors, the establishment figures, that typically would make up large portions of a presidential campaign. My donors give me $10, $20, $25 a month. And and that was a real campaign message, right? That he's raising money off the population, not off the elitists. And here's the most elite fundraising event ever. And so, but he needs the money. And so politics be damned. Give me the cash. And that's what this weekend's all about. And look, we'll see how far he gets. He desperately needs $40 million. And if he can get it, he's got some ability to then start expanding his campaign activity. But he's been limited even in his travel by lack of cash.
Yeah, give us the cash and the iPad, apparently, Jeannie, as we learn of the stylings this week of DJT. Those are not initials. I mean DJ like Club DJ Trump. One of the hallmarks, apparently, of visiting Mar-a-Lago is enjoying the musical stylings of Donald Trump. Complete with a velvet rope in front of his table, he brings out the iPad and blasts on full volume to the point where people cannot talk. In many cases, songs you would not associate with him. Jesus Christ Superstar, Lionel Richie, even Sinead O'Connor. Nothing compares to you, Jeannie. Does Joe Biden need an iPad?
Oh, gosh, please no. Yeah, that list of oldies is incredible. You know, there was the mix song, what was it, A Man's Man with Luciano Pavarotti?
That's right, yeah.
You know, I too read it. I couldn't get enough of it. You know, listen, Donald Trump needs to raise $43 million, if you believe the number they're putting out, because a lot of that, we hear, is going to go to pay not just for the campaign, as Rick was talking about, but for his legal bills, and that is desperately needed. At the end of February, Joe Biden had $155 million. We haven't gotten the March numbers yet. And you compare that to where Donald Trump was going into April, about $93 million. So he does need to make up this money. But, you know, you flip this around. One big question is how much money do two people with almost 100% name recognition need? And political scientists like me will tell you there is a point at which it's not going to help. So, you know, it's going to help a little, but, you know, at some point, the millions they rack up doesn't help them get more votes.
Well, nothing youngs things up, I figure, like Guns N' Roses and a little Elvis as we make our way into this campaign. Coming up with our panel, Congress returning next week. It's going to be a doozy here in town. We'll be back with Rick and Jeannie to break down what is on the agenda for a very busy couple of weeks ahead in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I do know that Speaker Johnson is interested in getting this done. A lot of us want to get this done. The question is how is it going to get done? I'm maybe not quite as optimistic about the speed of this, you know, but at the end of the day, none of it's done until all of it's done.
That was Republican Congressman Bill Huizenga of Michigan with us around this time yesterday, talking about potential aid for Ukraine. Back with us now, our panel, Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, alongside Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital in Arizona for the game. It's a shame that you won't be there for the whole thing, Rick, but I love the backdrop today. Jeannie, we've been asking the question, and it depends, of course, on what form an aid proposal arrives. But if Ukraine aid is tied to Israel aid, as it was in the Senate, if that is the House approach now, will progressive Democrats angry about Israel bring a new risk to funding for Kyiv?
They very well may. You know, I think what we're more likely to see is an effort to put conditions on that aid. Obviously, you're going to see some progressives vote against the aid to Israel without a ceasefire. But I do think as you move into the Senate, we may see Democrats who are pushing for conditions on that aid. And the really astonishing part is about, you know, what, 6 weeks ago, a couple months ago, when this all came up, the idea was that the Israel aid would help move the Ukraine aid forward. And now, of course, that has all changed given what has happened in the Middle East in the last, you know, several weeks, but certainly with the World Food Kitchen. World Central.
Yeah, so you may have Absolutely. Jeannie, we obviously have Democrats that may be upset on the Israel side, and Rick, on the other side, there could be plenty of Republicans angry about Ukraine aid. But perhaps one Republican in particular matters the most, and that would be the Congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who could very well act on her motion to vacate. And she doesn't seem to be backing down. She posted on X today, do you see the difference between Republican Speaker Johnson and Democrat Speaker Nancy Pelosi? That's right, there isn't one. Going on to say, we need a new Speaker of the House. Could she really do this when they return, Rick?
Yeah, sure. Crazy is as crazy does. And so she could trigger a election for a new speaker very easily and throw the entire House of Representatives back into a lurch like has already happened twice. And I don't think anybody would even blink an eye at it. That's the nature of the bizarre episodes going on in the House right now. Obviously, Speaker Johnson has to plow forward and have an agenda to get this bill done, which he's telling everybody he's, quote, got a plan. Be interesting to see what that plan is. I am hopeful that the House bill looks a lot like the Senate bill and they can just conference it and get something done quickly without another sort of pass through the Senate. But that's all legislative strategy. We'll see where that goes. But at least there seems to be the will of Congress to want to get something done for Ukraine. And it is ironic that only a month ago we thought that the Israeli aid would help push Ukraine through. Now it looks like Ukraine may help push Israeli aid through.
Amazing how this continues to shift under our feet. Jeannie, before we ever get to funding Ukraine or Israel, for that matter, it appears we'll be dealing with FISA, this Section 702, specifically with competing Republican bills coming from the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. Your view on this? Should the United States have to ask permission when spying on a bad guy overseas that happens to scoop up an American citizen?
Yeah, this is going to be quite a debate. It makes for really strange bedfellows. It always has. This was held up, I believe it was in February, over this issue of whether you need to get a warrant. I think we will see it pass. But I do think that if you are going to survey and it catches American citizens, we are best in terms of having the government have to get a warrant. I don't know if the House will go along with that, but warrants are part of the way in which we protect ourselves from a large government which, does step on our liberties when it uses its enormous power to survey.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, our closers, our all-star political panel. Thank you so much. And Rick, safe travels back from Arizona. We'll all be pulling for Alabama for you this weekend, maybe. Actually, that's totally a lie. I got Purdue winning the whole thing. Joe, what about you?
Oh, he's got the Arizona hat on. I saw that. We have an important weekend ahead, a more important week that will follow. Kaylee,
Indeed.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.